Hello. This video I'm going to be talking about vertical sync and probably proving myself to be an asshole because I'm only doing this video because I saw another video from some TechTubers that tried to cover vertical sync, but they missed some things, got some things wrong, and it just triggered me enough to decide, you know what, I'm going to take the knowledge that I acquired last year when I did an article looking into different forms of vertical sync and the kind of impacts it has on latency, at least going to presentment data, and decide, you know, take all that knowledge, try to make my own video. Probably no one's going to watch it, but who cares? I still feel like doing it. Because, well, yeah, I guess I am an asshole. Anyway, vertical synchronization. This is a frame, 16 by 9. Yep, I mean, it's just, I'm going to be using this later on. A and B, I just don't have a B here. So this is my version of a graphic that we see in plenty of things, where it's just, you know, this is 16.7 milliseconds wide, this is 10 milliseconds wide, and it's literally 167.7 pixels wide and 100 pixels wide. And it's just, this is the refresh rate for my monitor, 60 FPS, but this may be what a game renders at. But notice, you have this issue that, you know, this frame, it isn't finished rendering, so it would lead to tearing, or it would be dropped. Before I really got into the nitty-gritty about making this look right, I decided, you know what, I got a better idea. Let's do it this way. So yeah, I'm just going to turn that off. Oh, nope, that's right. That isn't this. This is still part of this. I'll turn that off. It's helpful when you can remember what everything is. Alright, so this is, the game is rendering as fast as it can, so it finishes this frame and it immediately goes to the next. No gap in between. Well, there might be some gap, but let's say no gap. But the problem is that only this much of this frame 2, is ready to be shown to the monitor. The rest hasn't been rendered yet, so it has to pull the old data. So this is frame 2, the newest frame, this is frame 1, an older frame. And we get this very obvious line right there. It's referred to as a screen tear. And as this keeps going, you see that, yeah, we do still have that tearing as we go through. So in this case, it's frame 1, frame 2, frame 3 is that one, frame 4. So it's 4, and then 5, 6, just that portion, 7. Wait a minute. Oh, I have that backwards? Nope. Okay, so I really should just label them with the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is 7. This is 6. This is still being shown. So this frame and this frame are actually the same. Well, at least this portion of the frame, that portion of the frame. That's from the same frame. So those are the same age. Alright. And then I kind of lost count. But anyway, this is what happens when it's just off enough that it has to write over. But in theory, if it were faster, you could actually have multiple tears in the screen at the same time. And that's because this is how your graphics card actually does this stuff, is it has this frame in its memory buffer. So this whole thing is the memory. There'd be other stuff in there. And this is just that one front buffer is what it's called, the one that gets scanned out to your display. And it does scan it out from top to bottom. If it's scanned out in a different direction, we wouldn't necessarily have tearing in the same way. Or if it's like scanned out from bottom to top, then these would just be upside down. So, yeah, it would be like that. But you'd probably need to I'm actually not sure how a frame is rendered by the GPU. It may still go from top to bottom to match. But then I could also see it being that some portions render faster than others. So it may not be perfectly top to bottom, you know, line by line. It may be section by section. Anyway, that is without any kind of impedance to the rendering. Is just going out as fast as it can. This, however, it would be if you are actually limiting the frame rate. So yeah, I'm going to turn off the tearing for now, just so it's not there. So this is like you're rendering the frame immediately though, hence why it's labeled immediate. But now you have the issue that there's all this time between this one, because this is still the most recent frame. That's the one that's going to be scanned out, but it's got this big delay on top of this thing. So it's like from when that frame first started rendering to when it is shown is at 16.7 milliseconds. That's not very desirable. This also brings me to my first issue with that video that I watched. That they always assumed in there that, and they made more than one assumption, but they always assumed that the input information was gathered at the beginning. This is actually not true. It is possible for the input information to be gathered later, because when you're rendering a frame, the first thing you're doing isn't actually like drawing out, doing the sampling to create the image. No, you have all the composites that have to be put together. So it's like where the textures go, how does the lighting work, things like that. That would be done ahead of the actual sampling to produce the frame. So some of that input stuff can actually be measured later, can be taken later. And part of the reason I know this is not just because I have a very crude, basic understanding of how graphics cards work, but also because the most basic Unity 3D engine tutorial, the Volleyball tutorial, it talks about in there, use late update instead of update. The update call is made every time you get a new frame. Late update, also every time with a frame, but it's delayed a little bit. So it's late. The advantage to that is inputs are taken later. So this is actually how they have you doing it for capturing inputs, is they delay it because that way it minimizes the latency. Now this would be ideal delay, where the moment that frame is complete, the moment is ready to be sent out, it is, because that would be right here. I just don't have that drawn here. But that's ideal. We don't live in an idealized world. We live in a real world, so they would actually pad this. Because, it's paying attention. This is how fast I'm rendering. So, yeah, I figure this is, going to take 10 milliseconds. It's 100 pixels tall, 10 milliseconds. So I'm going to pad it with another millisecond. So I'm going to do that because that way, just in case I'm off and it ends up taking 11 milliseconds, it's fine. The padding may be more than that, maybe less than that, depend on how it does its math to predict how long certain frames will take, but it'll do that and try to, keep that 60 frames per second that you see, but it's waiting. It's delaying when it's starting that frame, so the input latency is minimized. And yeah, so you still have a good experience. In theory, you don't have much tearing though. Depending though, frame rate limiters, you'll still get some tearing. It all depends though. Now the next thing that I'm going to come to is double buffering. This is actually one of the other assumptions that video made, which was that basically VSync is double buffering, which is not true. VSync encompasses multiple technologies. Arguably, this is a form of vertical synchronization, a frame rate limit, because as long as it's implemented well, and that's not to say it's implemented badly in some cases, but just as long as it's doing its job very well, you're not going to get any screen tearing. So hey, you've achieved vertical synchronization, but you also have the performance kind of limited, and it's doing it in a single buffer scenario, where it's only writing to the one buffer, to the front buffer. It's just timing it correctly so that it doesn't collide with the scanning out. Now, double buffering gives you a second buffer. So right here, A and then B. And I'm not necessarily, I really should have these numbered. That would make it so much easier. But the idea here is you have a front buffer that is the one being scanned out, and a back buffer that is not being scanned out. Then what happens is, so that front buffer right here, it is ready. It has a full frame by the time it gets to this. The back buffer doesn't. So this one will be scanned out. The thing is, because double buffering is explicitly meant to prevent screen tearing, it locks that buffer. You cannot write into that memory until it has finished scanning out. So the engine has to write to the back buffer, which I'm pretty sure right here would just drop that frame and then go to this one. But it only happens at that first frame. So we see that A. So the delay, at best, is like ideally it would be this 6.7 milliseconds if somehow you could, in that very final instance, capture the input and render the frame correctly. It's not actually how it works, so the latency, the input latency, is going to be more than this. It's going to fall somewhere in here. It shouldn't be all the way up at the top, shouldn't be a full 16.7 milliseconds, but it is going to be in here. Now, an issue with double buffering is once that back buffer is full, there's nowhere to write. So yeah, it drew this frame here, but it can't start the next. So this is all just empty time. Nothing's happening there. You're doing stuff. You're giving inputs, but those inputs aren't captured. Not until right here. So that is not ideal. But that is what double buffering gives you, because it is meant to avoid the screen tearing, and it does that. Now, I'm not sure how viable this is. I kind of doubt it would be viable. I would just think it may be more complicated than with the frame rate limiting, that you delay it. So, you have that same padding here so that you don't end up missing, but you delay it so that way you minimize that amount of latency. But it still is, you are locking the frame rate to whatever the cycle rate is, because it doesn't have anywhere left to write to. This is a fairly common form of vertical sync, but there is another that you do see in plenty of games. Some, it's not even explicitly said, it's just how the VSync works. And also, there's fast sync and enhanced sync that are related to it, and I'll get to those later, and that is triple buffering. So if we look down here, that means that there are 3 buffers, A, B, and C. I don't use the C anywhere else, but that's just how I have it labeled here. And the reason why it's so nice is just like with double buffering. We have a front buffer that is locked. It is being scanned out. It will not be written to, but the engine always has a spot to write to. So it's rendering out this one, then it renders that one, and that one, and that one, and that one, and just bounces back and forth, back and forth. And it will always scan out the most recent frame. And by the way this works is, let's say this is front buffer, this is back buffer 1, back buffer 2. If B is the newest frame when it comes time to scan out the next one, then this is just labeled the front buffer, and it starts scanning it out. It doesn't actually move it in memory. No. This would stay exactly where it is in the memory. This now is just labeled a back buffer, so the engine is allowed to write over it. Now, this is also something that happens with triple buffering. It could also happen over there with the frame rate limiting, potentially, where it drops a frame. So this frame, it wasn't complete in time to be rendered here, so it's not used there. But it's also, we got this whole frame that's rendered ahead of, after this one. So this is a new frame. This one, we don't need it. It's just dropped. It's thrown away. Same thing happens to this one. Now down here, it because of how these line up, it's these that get thrown out. But it still is. This is something that happens in order to make sure you're getting the newest. Now, because it's going as fast as it can, you're likely not going to see this delay, this padding that, as I said, I'm not sure if it will actually happen in a double buffering scenario. It might. I just am unsure. This I know can happen in some games. Yeah. Now, this is where we get to something kind of wonky, and also relates to how I know that there is this padding here that is just ignored in that one video, that it doesn't start rendering immediately. It will actually wait and has some padding there, because this would not happen. This pattern, this diagonal pattern, would not happen without that padding. So what the hell is this? This is some data that I got last year when doing my article looking at vertical synchronization. This specific scenario is the game had a frame rate limit of 60 FPS, but I was running it in borderless full screen. Why does that matter? Because Windows has something called the Desktop Window Manager. This is what actually composites what you see whenever you're not running in exclusive full screen or just full screen. So every window on your normal desktop is put together by this. This is what figures out, okay, this window is on top of that one, so we don't need to show that, we need to show this. But it does something else. it says to every window, I'm going to double buffer you. And actually, you know what? What I just said there is wrong, because it doesn't tell them. It just has a double buffer like this. So this is what is actually being rendered with a frame rate limit in place, and it has that padding there. And then this is what is actually happening, because it's implementing its own double buffering. But the problem is that padding actually interacts with this. So you have the delay here because of that, because of the double buffering, but the way it interacts with things, because excuse me, the engine is apparently still somehow aware of this. It is increasing the delay. It's padding it more and more and more in order to prevent there from being an issue, which actually produces its own issue, because now you're getting greater and greater latency until it finally reaches a point that I try to show in here, and I may have this off, where down here it's like, okay, that gap is way too big, I'm going to reset this. The padding gets reset, it will render out the next frame immediately. In this case, it also ends up dropping a frame. Now, for what it's worth though, the double buffering desktop window manager is actually kind of nice in some cases. I personally prefer to play in a borderless window, not because of this, but because there's greater crash tolerance. You know, like, hey, if that crashes, I can alt-tab and get out of it. In exclusive full screen, a game crashes, you may be stuck having to restart your computer, and I don't like that. So, yeah. But, you know something? This is actually kind of nice, because it's why, for me, when playing some games, it does, here, let me put it another way. If you look at this, what do you notice? It looks kind of like this. There are 3 buffers here, sort of. So it's sort of like a 2.5 buffering, because the engine isn't fully aware of it, but it's still, it lets you ensure that you're getting a full frame out, but it's not, and also this would be without a frame rate especially, so it would be more, I had turned it off, it'd be more like this, implemented with this. You kind of get a triple buffering effect, where the game is rendering as fast as it wants, but you have a guaranteed 1 frame latency, because that's 16.7 milliseconds. I just realized I kept putting in the wrong values and stuff. I was putting 16.777, not 16.6666, but, you know, close enough. So, yeah, you do kind of get a nice mix of things there, sort of. Yeah, you got latency, which isn't desirable for plenty of games and people that are sensitive to that, but if you're okay with some latency, and you like that your game can just render as fast as it wants, you kind of get that. Now we get to the next thing. So, but first, just, yeah, recap. This proves that, at least in that scenario of a frame rate limit, the internal one in Serious Sam Fusion 2017 has padding, because you could not see this behavior without it. And I do also have a graph, I just don't have it here. I'd have to pull out the old graphs, where you didn't have this structure here. So that would have just been rendering with borderless full screen. So we have the DWM, but without the frame rate limit, and you don't see this pattern at all, because it's just all clumped up right there. Now we get to this, because that article I've got a GTX 1080 and an RX Vega 64. I wanted to look at both. So this is in exclusive full screen. So this is basically the ideal. Let me zoom out a little bit so we can see all of them at the same time. There we go. So these two are the coarse graphs. So this is just showing what the MS Between presents, what most people, what most reviewers, when they're using frame time data, this I'm pretty sure is what they're referencing, is MS Between presents. That's what it is at any specific time in the run I made, which they're 5-minute runs, so 300 seconds. This is a frequency plot of it. So you can see for the GTX 1080, mainly have it all in a clump right here with a couple kind of tight peaks right there. Whereas here on the RX Vega, again, you see it, freely moving up and down, because why wouldn't it? It is able to render as fast as it wants, but it does work out that you see, a few peaks here, but it's still all clumped right there. Now, both NVIDIA and AMD have technologies that, in theory, give you driver-side triple buffering. It introduces a new buffer, and it holds on to that, and so that you can have the newest frame being shown. That's what the concept behind it is. And this is another issue that I have, really the main one that made me want to do this video, because I collected the data. I know how this stuff works, at least in that one game. And this video that triggered me was basically just reading the marketing copy for FastSync, because, look at that. This is not driver-side triple buffering. This is. This is what enhanced sync looks like. And it looks a lot like this. Yeah, maybe a little bit looser, but that may also... Actually, I can't tell. It looks like it's the same. But you know something, when playing that, I didn't have any tearing. I saw no tearing when playing it. I even played a different game to make sure enhanced sync was even running. I went into a different game that without enhanced sync, there was tearing. With enhanced sync, it wasn't there. Frame rate wasn't hit, though. So what are we seeing with FastSync here? It is not doing driver-side triple buffering because it's actually implementing a frame limit. And it's just easier to see with this, which, let me explain first. This is the MS between percent. So this is what most people seem to refer to when they talk about frame time. But this is MS between display change. So this is an actual measurement of the time between frames being sent out. And I like it because you can have something where it's where the frame time it's all messy. But then you look at the display time and it's smooth. That is what actually happened with the data I have for the frame rate limit. All the way over here. It actually had the frame time data jumping up and down because it had to guess kinda at it. And you know what, they're not always going to be at 100 FPS. Some are going to be at 95, some will be at 105 instantaneous FPS. So you just invert that to get this. But here we have this limiting. So it's like this corresponds to 120 FPS, this corresponds to 180 FPS. 2 times my refresh rate and 3 times my refresh rate. That's noticeable. You feel when it suddenly jumps, because there is a little bit of a stutter to that. Now true, this was last year that I collected this data. It is possible NVIDIA has improved FastSync since then. I don't know. I prefer running with my RX Vega for a number of reasons, but to my knowledge, they've not made any change. I've not seen any news about it, and even then I wouldn't be surprised if NVIDIA had never talked about it, because there are people that they don't like FastSync because of this exact behavior, because it is not desirable. It is not driver-side triple buffering. It is an impersonation of it, and it's kind of lousy at it. Enhanced sync, though, people, like in that video, describe it as an equivalent. It is not. It is a counterpart, but it is not equivalent because you can have whatever frame rate you want. It just makes sure that it's only a new frame, a full frame, that is sent out to the monitor, and that is desirable. And to help nail it home, this is that same kind of frequency plot, but for the FastSync and enhanced sync data. Now, we look at the FastSync, and you see 2 very clearly defined peaks. And by the way, this is this data. It's the same data, just presented in a different way. And here's the enhanced sync data. Take a close look at that. See that shape? How it's just a blob there and you have some peaks in it? Blob, some peaks. With enhanced sync, the data looks very, very similar, has the same kind of characteristics as running without any form of VSync at all, running exclusive full screen, so it is getting straight to the monitor. With FastSync, though, it does not look like that. It does not give you a near to optimal, I shouldn't say perfect, near to optimal experience, where optimal is just exclusive full screen, but with the benefit of some level of buffering in order to avoid screen tears. That is not what FastSync is. That's what enhanced sync is. AMD did good, NVIDIA not so much. So yeah, that's a quick rundown of different VSync stuff. And I have no idea if anyone's going to watch this. I have no idea if anyone's going to care. But I have it done now. So I feel satisfied in my assholery for not even calling them out by name, because I'm not that big an asshole, but responding to a video that tried to cover this stuff and kind of got it wrong. Although I do want to say one thing, that they were correct in their conclusion, because they were looking at, is it worth running at a frame rate above the refresh rate of your monitor? Subjectively, the answer is yes, it is. This data that I'm showing you here and here, that is all from Serious Sam Fusion 2017. That was from last year that I did that I collect all that data. I've done other things more recently, including a run through in both Wolfenstein 2 and Killing Floor 2 using multiple frame rate targets, using FRTC on my RX Vega, and even at 70 FPS compared to 60 FPS in Wolfenstein 2 especially, you notice a difference. The 70 FPS does feel smoother because you're getting those frames, they're a little bit fresher, and you can kind of feel that. And it's also, if that frame rate target misses even one frame, there's a little bit of a stutter there. It may not be too bad, but it is present. 70 FPS, it's not there. You don't have that issue because it's always hitting those frames. Because in both those cases, with Killing Floor 2 and Wolfenstein 2, the RX Vega is more than a match for that. It can sustain a solid 70, but there's always that variance. At 60, that variance causes a stutter. At 70, no stutter because it's still faster than the monitor. It is advantageous to run above that frame rate. One thing I will throw in though, that I find kind of interesting, Radeon Chill, great feature. You can set a lower and upper limits, and it'll actually drop the frame rate to that lower limit if nothing much is going on. By nothing much, we mean you're not giving many inputs. I have yet to actually experience screen tearing when using that, and I like that feature because you can really cut down on the power that your GPU is pulling, and that's just really nice. Also means that the fans are going slower. It is pretty neat. And in the marketing material for that, as I recall, it does talk about having some padding in there. So it delays when that frame is being drawn so that it minimizes latency. So you get minimized latency, lower power usage, lower fan noise, and as I said, I cannot recall running into screen tearing with it. It's great. It really is a great technology. Not what you should go to if you want VSync, but definitely use it if you got it. Anyway, that's enough of me just blathering on. If you watched this, I hope you learned something. And if you didn't, I'm sorry. I wish I could refund your time, but that's not how things work. Yep. See ya.